Some people believe the smallest mistakes disappear with time, but sometimes a single handwritten note can quietly change two lives forever. Rain fell steadily across the crowded parking lot outside an upscale shopping center on the edge of downtown Seattle, turning the rows of polished vehicles into shimmering reflections beneath the gray afternoon sky. Most people hurried toward the entrance with umbrellas raised above their heads, too busy escaping the weather to notice a young woman struggling to guide an old bicycle between expensive cars. Emily Brooks lowered her eyes as she carefully maneuvered around a row of luxury vehicles, balancing two grocery bags on one handlebar while her worn backpack slipped from one shoulder. She had just finished the first of two jobs she worked every day, and every dollar she earned had already been promised to rent, groceries, and the medication her father needed after months of serious health problems. Nothing about her life allowed room for unexpected expenses, yet she still moved with quiet patience, offering polite smiles to strangers who rarely smiled back. As a gust of wind pushed against her bicycle, the front wheel suddenly shifted. The metal handle scraped across the side of a sleek black luxury sedan with a sharp sound that seemed impossibly loud against the steady rhythm of falling rain. Emily froze. Her breathing stopped for a moment as she stared at the thin silver scratch stretching across the flawless paint. Her hands began to tremble. She looked around the parking lot, expecting someone to shout, but no one had noticed. A family hurried toward the entrance. A businessman rushed into the rain with his briefcase over his head. The owner of the car was nowhere in sight. She could have left. No one had seen what happened. No cameras were visible from where she stood, at least not that she noticed through the rain. For several long seconds, she simply stood there, staring at the scratch, while tears slowly gathered in her eyes. She quietly reached into her wallet. Inside were 3 $20 bills, 2 $5 bills, and a few crumpled singles. It was nearly everything she had after paying for her father's prescriptions that morning. Emily knew it would never come close to repairing a luxury vehicle, but pretending nothing had happened felt far heavier than losing every dollar she had. She searched her backpack until she found a small spiral notebook, carefully tore out a clean page, and leaned against the wet bicycle seat to keep the paper dry while she wrote. Her handwriting shook as raindrops splashed across the page. "I am deeply sorry. I accidentally scratched your car while trying to move my bicycle. I know this damage is my responsibility. I do not have enough money to pay for the repairs today, but I promise I will. This is my phone number. Please call me, and I will do everything I can to make this right." She folded the note with remarkable care, wrapped the small amount of cash inside it, and tucked everything securely beneath the windshield wiper where the rain would not immediately wash it away. Emily gently placed her fingertips against the cold hood of the sedan, as though silently apologizing once more before stepping back. She whispered, "I truly hope you can forgive me." Then she picked up her bicycle, wiped away the tears mixing with the rain on her face, and slowly walked toward the bus stop instead of riding away, her shoulders heavy with worry, but her conscience unexpectedly lighter. Hidden high above the parking lot, a security camera quietly captured every second, including the moment a black luxury SUV rolled into the far corner of the lot, where a calm man in a tailored charcoal suit watched the young woman disappear into the rain without realizing she had just left behind the one thing money had failed to buy for him in many years. The rain had almost stopped by the time Ethan Park stepped out of the black luxury sport utility vehicle and walked toward the scratched sedan without any visible concern. His tailored charcoal overcoat rested neatly across his shoulders, and his calm expression revealed nothing about the influence he carried beyond the quiet parking lot. One of his security men noticed the thin mark across the driver's side door almost immediately. "Sir, someone damaged the vehicle," he said while carefully examining the scratch. Another member of the security team instinctively scanned the surrounding area. "We should secure the footage and identify whoever did this." Ethan said nothing at first. His attention had already shifted to the folded piece of paper tucked carefully beneath the windshield wiper. Unlike the scratch, the note had been placed with remarkable care, protected from the rain as though whoever left it worried more about the paper than about escaping unnoticed. Ethan removed it slowly and unfolded the damp page. Several folded bills slipped gently into his hand before he began reading the handwritten message. The words were simple. The handwriting trembled. Every sentence carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had been frightened but had chosen honesty anyway. When he reached the final line promising to repay every dollar no matter how long it took, he quietly read it again. Then a third time. Around him, the security team waited for instructions. "Trace the phone number?" one of them asked. Another added, "We can have her located within the hour." Ethan remained silent for another long moment before looking back toward the nearly empty parking lot where rainwater still shimmered across the pavement. "Show me the camera footage first," he replied. Minutes later, they entered the shopping center security office. The surveillance video appeared on a large monitor. Ethan watched the recording from beginning to end without interrupting. He saw the old bicycle struggling against the wind. He saw the accidental scrape. More importantly, he watched Emily freeze instead of running. The footage captured every hesitation, every glance around the parking lot, every tear she tried to hide as she counted the small amount of money inside her wallet. Then it showed her carefully writing the note beneath the shelter of her backpack, so the rain would not blur the ink. Finally, it showed her gently placing the folded apology beneath the windshield wiper before quietly whispering something the camera could not hear. Ethan paused the recording just before she walked away. "Replay that section," he said. The video played again. And again. His security chief frowned with visible confusion. "Sir, it was clearly an accident. We can have the repair completed before dinner." Ethan nodded slightly without taking his eyes off the frozen image of Emily standing beside the sedan with rain falling across her shoulders. "The scratch is not what interests me." The room became silent. "Most people would have left," Ethan continued. "Some would have denied it even after being confronted. She admitted responsibility before anyone accused her." One of the younger security officers quietly smiled. "That is rare these days." Ethan folded the note with the same care Emily had used and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket instead of handing it to anyone else. "Do not contact her," he instructed calmly. His team exchanged surprised glances. "Not yet," Ethan added. "If she truly intended to keep her promise, she will spend every day worrying about that phone call." He looked once more at the paused security footage. Emily's frightened face remained on the screen, completely unaware that her greatest concern was no longer the scratch itself, but the curiosity of a man who had not been genuinely surprised by another person's honesty in many years. As the monitor faded to black, Ethan quietly stood, already knowing he would not forget the young woman whose apology felt far more valuable than the flawless paint on any luxury car he owned. For the next 3 days, Emily Brooks carried her cell phone everywhere as though it had become heavier than the worn backpack resting on her shoulders. Every unfamiliar number made her heart race, and every silent hour convinced her that the owner of the damaged car was quietly preparing a repair bill she could never afford. She had already begun setting aside part of every paycheck, skipping small comforts she had never truly been able to enjoy anyway. The old coffee she occasionally treated herself to after work disappeared from her routine. The bus ride home replaced the few times she would have borrowed a neighbor's bicycle. Every dollar mattered now because a promise, once made, could not simply be forgotten. Across the city, Ethan Park found himself thinking about the handwritten note far more often than he expected. It remained folded neatly inside the inner pocket of his jacket instead of being discarded with ordinary paperwork. More than once, he reached for it without realizing he was doing so, reading the same careful words as though they contained an answer he had been searching for long before the scratch had appeared on his car. Finally, one quiet morning, he instructed his security chief to verify only one thing. "I want to know whether the address attached to that phone number is real," he said calmly. "Nothing more.
No interviews.
No questions. No contact." Within a few hours, a simple report arrived. Emily lived in a modest duplex on a quiet residential street lined with aging maple trees. She worked mornings at a neighborhood grocery store and evenings at a family-owned bookstore cafe. There were no unpaid legal records, no suspicious financial activity, and no history that suggested deception. Ethan closed the folder after reading only the first page. Facts could explain a person's circumstances, but they rarely revealed character. That afternoon, wearing a plain navy jacket instead of one of his tailored suits, Ethan drove an ordinary gray sedan through Emily's neighborhood without attracting attention. He parked across the street just as Emily stepped outside carrying 2 reusable grocery bags and a paper pharmacy envelope. She walked slowly, not because she was tired, but because she was helping her father, Thomas Brooks, carefully down the front steps. His movements were steady but noticeably cautious, and Emily never rushed him. She adjusted his coat collar before they reached the sidewalk, smiled warmly, and reminded him to bring his reading glasses. They stopped briefly to greet an elderly neighbor whose trash container had tipped over in the morning wind. Without hesitation, Emily set her own bags on the ground and quietly helped gather scattered newspapers before continuing toward the bus stop with her father. No one thanked her dramatically. No one applauded. She simply returned to her routine as though kindness required no audience. Ethan remained inside the parked car, watching through the windshield without a single word. There was no performance in what he had witnessed, no carefully arranged display meant to impress strangers. It looked exactly like the woman who had chosen to leave a note instead of disappearing. Later that evening, Emily finished shelving books inside the small bookstore cafe before noticing a leather wallet resting beneath a reading chair near the window. She opened it only far enough to locate an identification card, then immediately handed it to the elderly owner before counting a single dollar inside. When the grateful customer returned searching for it nearly 20 minutes later, Emily smiled with visible relief as though she had recovered something of her own. From across the street, Ethan quietly observed the exchange through the cafe window. As warm lights reflected against the evening glass, he began to understand that the apology on the folded piece of paper had not been an isolated moment of honesty. It was simply another page from a life built upon quiet choices that almost no one else ever noticed. The following week settled into a familiar rhythm for Emily Brooks, yet the quiet worry she carried never truly disappeared. Every evening, she opened a small envelope hidden inside the top drawer of her dresser and placed another few dollars beside the money she had already saved. She kept a handwritten list of every deposit, calculating how long it might take before she could finally pay for the repair she believed was waiting for her. Although the total grew slowly, she never once considered giving up. A promise, even one made to a stranger, deserved to be honored. Ethan Park, however, had reached a different conclusion. Reading reports no longer interested him because numbers could not explain why someone chose honesty when no reward existed. He wanted to understand whether Emily's character remained the same when life quietly tested her without witnesses. Rather than sending investigators, he decided to see for himself. Dressed in simple clothes that blended easily into the morning crowd, Ethan visited the neighborhood grocery store where Emily worked. She greeted every customer with the same gentle courtesy, regardless of whether they purchased a single loaf of bread or filled an entire shopping cart. An elderly veteran accidentally dropped several cans near the checkout lane, and before another employee even noticed, Emily hurried over to help gather them without making the man feel embarrassed. She smiled warmly and continued scanning his groceries as though nothing unusual had happened. Ethan watched from another register, saying nothing. 2 days later, he visited the bookstore cafe, where Emily worked evenings. The shop was quiet, filled with the comforting scent of coffee and old books. Ethan selected a novel from a display shelf and deliberately left a $20 bill beneath the edge of a reading table after paying for his drink. He remained seated near the window, pretending to read while carefully observing the room. Nearly 15 minutes passed before Emily discovered the money while cleaning the area. She looked around immediately, picked up the bill, and carried it to the front counter instead of placing it in her pocket. She asked every customer whether they had misplaced cash, and when no one claimed it, she wrote the date and time on an envelope before locking it inside the store safe according to company policy. She never imagined that the forgotten bill belonged to the quiet customer reading near the window. Ethan quietly retrieved it from the owner the next afternoon after identifying himself with the purchase receipt. Once again, Emily had passed a test she never knew existed. Days continued to pass, and Ethan's curiosity steadily transformed into admiration. Every observation revealed the same pattern. Emily returned extra change when customers were overpaid. She stayed after closing to help a coworker organize heavy boxes without being asked. She brought homemade soup to an elderly neighbor recovering from surgery before leaving for her second job. None of these moments appeared extraordinary on their own, yet together they painted a portrait of someone who treated integrity as naturally as breathing. Meanwhile, Emily still glanced nervously at her telephone whenever it vibrated, convinced the owner of the damaged car would eventually call to discuss the repair bill. She had no idea that the man she feared disappointing had already learned far more about her than she could possibly imagine. Standing outside the bookstore beneath the warm glow of the evening lights, Ethan slipped the carefully folded apology note from his jacket pocket once more. He compared the quiet courage written across that damp sheet of paper with everything he had witnessed over the past several days, and for the first time in many years, he found himself believing that genuine character still existed in a world where appearances so often replaced the truth. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since the rainy afternoon in the parking lot, and Emily Brooks had managed to save just over $300 inside the small envelope hidden in her bedroom drawer. It was nowhere near enough to repair a luxury vehicle, but every bill represented another hour of standing behind a cash register, another evening shelving books, or another lunch she quietly skipped without complaint. Each time she counted the money, she whispered the same promise to herself that she had written on the note. Somehow she would make things right. Then, on an otherwise ordinary Thursday afternoon, her phone rang while she was finishing her shift at the grocery store. The number was unfamiliar. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken before she answered, with a soft greeting. A calm male voice introduced himself as the personal assistant to the owner of the damaged vehicle and politely requested a meeting the following afternoon at a private office downtown. There was no anger in his voice, no threats, only professionalism. Even so, Emily's hands trembled after the call ended. She knew the moment she had been expecting had finally arrived. That evening she told her father the truth for the first time. Thomas Brooks listened quietly from his favorite armchair while she explained everything, from the accident to the handwritten apology and the savings she had been putting aside. When she finished, he looked at his daughter with gentle pride instead of disappointment. "Money comes and goes," he said softly, "but your name follows you for the rest of your life. You protected your name by telling the truth." Emily smiled faintly, though the worry in her eyes remained. The following afternoon she dressed in her cleanest navy blouse and carefully placed the envelope of savings into her purse. Every dollar she had managed to save went with her. As she entered the elegant office building overlooking the Seattle skyline, polished marble floors reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through towering windows. The receptionist greeted her warmly and escorted her toward a quiet conference room without offering any explanation. Emily sat alone at the long wooden table, her fingers resting nervously on the envelope inside her purse. Moments later, the door opened. A well-dressed man entered with calm, measured steps. It took Emily only a few seconds to recognize him. She had seen his photograph in local business magazines and charity event articles displayed near the grocery checkout stands. Ethan Park, the successful businessman whose companies quietly owned properties throughout the city. Rumors surrounded his extraordinary influence, yet he carried himself with remarkable composure. Emily immediately stood. Her face lost what little color remained. "Mr. Park," she whispered, lowering her eyes, "I am so sorry about your car." Before Ethan could speak, Emily removed the envelope from her purse and carefully placed it on the table with both hands. "This is everything I have saved so far. It is only a beginning. I know it is not enough, but if you allow me, I will continue making monthly payments until every penny is repaid. I do not know how many years it will take, but I gave you my word." The conference room became completely silent. Ethan looked at the envelope without touching it. He noticed the edges were worn from being carried so often, as though Emily had been prepared for this meeting every day since the accident. There was no attempt to negotiate, no excuse about her circumstances, no request for sympathy. There was only quiet accountability offered with genuine sincerity. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward the young woman standing across from him. In that single moment, he realized she still believed this meeting was only about repairing a scratched car. while he had already come to understand that what truly stood before him was something infinitely more valuable than flawless paint or expensive metal. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, where the carefully folded handwritten note had remained every day since the rain first brought their paths together. The quiet conference room seemed to grow even stiller as Ethan Park slowly unfolded the weathered sheet of notebook paper he had carried with him every day since the rainy afternoon in the parking lot. The paper had dried long ago, but faint wrinkles still marked the places where raindrops had touched the ink. Emily immediately recognized it. Her eyes widened with surprise before she lowered her gaze again, embarrassed that something she had written in panic had been preserved so carefully. Ethan placed the note gently on the polished wooden table between them, smoothing the edges with deliberate care. "Do you remember every word you wrote?" he asked in a calm voice. Emily nodded quietly. "Yes, Mr. Park. I meant every word then, and I still do." Ethan looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. "I believe you." Emily blinked, uncertain whether she had heard him correctly. Ethan reached for the envelope filled with her savings, but instead of opening it, he carefully slid it back across the table toward her. "Keep your money." Emily stared at the envelope without touching it.
"No, sir."
"I cannot do that. The damage was my responsibility." Ethan offered a small, thoughtful smile. The scratch was repaired the next morning. That problem disappeared in less than 24 hours. He paused, resting one hand lightly on the folded note. This did not. Emily looked at the paper again, confused by his words. Ethan continued in the same steady tone. "I have spent years surrounded by people who protect themselves before they protect the truth. I have watched talented people deny obvious mistakes, blame strangers, and invent excuses even when everyone already knew what happened. Then one rainy afternoon, I watched a young woman with almost no money choose honesty when she believed no one would ever know otherwise." Emily felt her face grow.
"Warm."
"I only did what I thought was right." Ethan nodded gently.
"Exactly."
"That is why I kept this." He lifted the handwritten note once more. "Not because someone scratched my car, but because someone reminded me that integrity still exists." Silence settled between them, comfortable rather than awkward. Afternoon sunlight stretched across the conference table, illuminating the faded pencil marks and the careful handwriting that had unexpectedly become one of Ethan's most valued possessions. Emily finally looked up at him. "You knew who I was before today, did not you?" Ethan answered honestly. "Yes." He explained that he had quietly verified her address after reading the note, then visited the grocery store and the bookstore cafe without revealing his identity. He told her about the elderly customer she had helped, the wallet she had returned, the money she had placed in the safe instead of keeping, and the countless ordinary moments when she had chosen kindness without expecting recognition. Emily listened in complete surprise. She had never imagined anyone had been paying attention to those small decisions. "I was not testing your honesty," Ethan said softly. "I was trying to understand whether the woman who left this note was real." Every day you answered that question without knowing it had been asked. Emily looked down at her hands, overwhelmed by emotions she struggled to express. She had entered the building expecting a financial burden she might carry for years. Instead, she had been seen for the quiet choices that had shaped her entire life. Ethan carefully folded the note once again and returned it to the inside pocket of his jacket. "Some people collect valuable paintings," he said with a faint smile. "I carry a handwritten apology because it reminds me that genuine character still exists." For the first time since the accident, Emily felt the weight she had been carrying begin to disappear, replaced by something she had not expected to find inside that elegant office, the quiet certainty that honesty, even when costly, had never been wasted. Emily Brooks remained seated for several moments after the silence settled between them, still trying to understand how a conversation she had feared for weeks had transformed into something entirely different. The envelope containing every dollar she had managed to save rested untouched beside her, while the burden she had carried since the rainy afternoon seemed to dissolve with every passing second. Ethan Park rose from his chair and walked toward the wide windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. The afternoon sun reflected against rows of glass buildings, casting long bands of golden light across the conference room floor. Without turning around, he spoke in the same calm voice that had remained steady throughout their meeting. "There is one more reason I ask you to come here today." Emily listened quietly, uncertain what to expect next. Ethan turned back toward her and placed a simple business folder on the table. "One of my charitable foundations is expanding its community outreach programs. We need someone to help coordinate volunteer projects, organize neighborhood partnerships, and work directly with families who need practical support. Technical skills can be taught. Character cannot." Emily looked at the folder, but made no move to open it. "Are you offering me a job?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded once. "I am offering you an opportunity to apply for one." Emily looked surprised. Ethan continued before she could misunderstand his meaning. "You impressed me because you earned my respect without asking for special treatment. I would not dishonor that by handing you a position you did not earn. You would complete the same interviews, the same background review, and the same evaluation process as every other applicant. If someone else proves more qualified, the position belongs to them. If you earn it, no one will ever be able to say it was given to you because of me." Emily slowly smiled, and for the first time since entering the building, the worry disappeared completely from her face. "Then I would like the chance to compete fairly," she replied. "If I succeed, I want it to be because I deserve it." Ethan's expression softened with genuine admiration. That single answer confirmed everything he had quietly observed during the previous 2 weeks.
She was
not searching for rescue. She was searching for dignity. He slid the folder toward her. Inside were the application materials, a detailed description of the position, and information about the Foundation's mission of supporting families facing financial hardship and medical challenges. Emily carefully turned each page, recognizing programs that had quietly helped neighborhoods throughout the city for years. She had never known who stood behind them. "I have heard wonderful things about this organization," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "The people doing the work deserve the credit, not the person signing the checks." Emily closed the folder and looked at him with sincere gratitude. "Thank you for believing that one mistake did not define me." Ethan gently shook his head. "It was never the mistake that mattered. It was the decision you made immediately afterward." He glanced briefly toward the folded note still resting safely inside his jacket pocket. "That note reminded me that honesty is not measured when life is easy. It reveals itself when telling the truth becomes expensive." Emily stood and extended her hand. Ethan accepted it with quiet respect, not as a powerful businessman greeting a stranger, but as one person acknowledging the character of another. As she walked toward the conference room door carrying the application folder instead of a repair bill, the future before her looked completely different from the one she had imagined only an hour earlier. Ethan remained by the window after she left, watching the elevator doors close through the glass wall outside. He realized that the greatest return on any investment was not found in buildings, companies, or financial markets, but in recognizing genuine integrity when it appeared unexpectedly, often in the quietest people the world overlooked every single day. The weeks that followed brought quiet but meaningful changes into Emily Brooks's life. She completed every step of the application process exactly as Ethan Park had promised, never mentioning their unusual first meeting to the interview panel or expecting special consideration. She prepared carefully after long workdays, studying community outreach programs late into the evening while continuing her shifts at the grocery store and the bookstore cafe. When the final interview ended, she walked out with the same humble gratitude she carried into every challenge, believing that doing her best was the only part she could control. Several days later, an official letter arrived at her small home. Emily unfolded it with trembling hands while her father watched from the kitchen table. The Foundation had selected her for the position based on her interviews, references, and demonstrated commitment to serving others. She covered her mouth in disbelief before tears slowly filled her eyes. Thomas Brooks smiled quietly, knowing his daughter had earned the opportunity through the same honesty that had guided her entire life. Emily soon discovered that the Foundation's work was far more personal than she had imagined. Every day she met families struggling with medical bills, elderly neighbors living alone, and parents working multiple jobs to provide for their children. Rather than remaining behind a desk, she visited neighborhoods, listened to people's stories, and connected them with practical resources. Her natural compassion quickly earned the trust of volunteers and families alike. Ethan observed her progress from a respectful distance, receiving regular reports from department directors who praised her professionalism without realizing she already held his admiration long before joining the organization. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emily accompanied her father to a follow-up appointment at the regional medical center where he had continued receiving treatment. After the examination, the financial counselor entered the room carrying a folder filled with paperwork. Emily immediately prepared herself for another difficult conversation about expenses. Instead, the counselor smiled warmly and explained that a private charitable grant had covered nearly all of Thomas's remaining medical costs over the previous several months. Emily looked down at the documents in confusion. Every payment had already been made. Every outstanding balance had been cleared. "There must be a mistake," she said quietly. "We never applied for any additional assistance." The counselor gently shook her head. The support was arranged through a confidential donor who requested complete privacy. "We were instructed not to reveal the donor's identity unless permission was given." Emily thanked her politely, but questions lingered in her mind throughout the drive home. A few days later, she attended her first leadership meeting at the foundation headquarters. After the meeting concluded, Ethan invited her into his office to discuss an upcoming volunteer initiative. As they spoke, Emily noticed a familiar wooden frame resting on a bookshelf beside several family photographs and community awards. Inside the frame was the folded handwritten apology she had left beneath the windshield wiper weeks earlier. She smiled with quiet surprise before turning back toward Ethan. "You really kept it," she said softly. Ethan followed her gaze and nodded. "It reminds me every day that the smallest choices often reveal the greatest character." Emily hesitated before asking one final question. "Were you also the anonymous donor who helped my father?" Ethan remained silent for a brief moment before answering with gentle honesty. "Your father deserved excellent care because he is a good man. What you did in the parking lot simply reminded me not to overlook people whose quiet dignity often goes unnoticed." Emily felt tears gather once more, not because someone had helped her family, but because the kindness had been offered without expecting recognition or gratitude. Standing inside the peaceful office, she realized that genuine generosity, much like genuine honesty, was strongest when it asked for nothing in return. Nearly 3 years passed, and what began as a single rainy afternoon slowly became a quiet story that shaped more lives than either Emily Brooks or Ethan Park could have imagined. The Community Outreach Foundation continued expanding across Washington, opening new partnerships with neighborhood organizations, food banks, libraries, and health clinics. Emily became one of the most trusted leaders on the team, not because she spoke the loudest in meetings or sought recognition for her work, but because every decision she made reflected the same quiet honesty that had once inspired a stranger to see the world differently. Volunteers admired the calm respect she showed every family, whether they needed temporary assistance or simply someone willing to listen without judgment. Thomas Brooks regained his strength little by little, eventually returning to the neighborhood park where he enjoyed long morning walks beneath the maple trees that lined the familiar sidewalks. Watching his daughter build a meaningful career brought him a peace that no amount of money could have purchased. One bright spring afternoon, the foundation welcomed students from a local high school for a leadership workshop inside its headquarters. The visitors toured the offices, met staff members, and listened to stories about service, responsibility, and trust. As the group entered Ethan Park's office, one curious student noticed a small wooden frame resting beside family photographs and awards recognizing years of charitable work. Inside the frame was not a certificate, a medal, or an expensive photograph, but a simple handwritten note on worn notebook paper. The student smiled with surprise. "Mr. Park," he asked politely, "why do you keep something that looks so ordinary on your desk?" Ethan looked toward the framed note before answering. A gentle smile appeared across his face, the same quiet expression that had become familiar to everyone who worked beside him. "Because it reminds me never to judge a person by what they own, how they dress, or how powerful they appear, he replied. The greatest measure of character often reveals itself when someone believes nobody is watching. Emily happened to be passing the office at that moment while carrying project folders for the afternoon meeting. Hearing those words, she paused briefly outside the open doorway before continuing down the hallway with a grateful smile. She never interrupted. She never reminded anyone that she had written the note inside the frame. Some memories did not need to be claimed in order to remain meaningful. Later that evening, after the office had grown quiet, Ethan stood beside the large window overlooking the city.
Lights.
The black luxury sedan had long since been replaced, and the faint scratch that once seemed important had disappeared years earlier. Yet the folded apology remained exactly where it had always been, protected inside its simple wooden frame. Looking at it, Ethan realized that expensive possessions eventually faded, businesses changed, and success was measured differently as time passed. What endured were the moments when ordinary people quietly chose integrity over convenience, compassion over indifference, and responsibility over excuses. Emily had never intended to change another person's life when she left that handwritten apology beneath a windshield wiper on a rainy afternoon. She had only tried to do the right thing because her conscience would not allow anything less. Yet that single decision quietly inspired acts of generosity, restored hope to struggling families, strengthened an entire charitable organization, and reminded one of the city's most influential men that true wealth could never be counted in dollars alone. Sometimes the smallest acts leave the deepest marks, not on polished metal or expensive paint, but on the human heart. And on that ordinary piece of notebook paper, carefully preserved through the passing years, the world quietly remembered what dignity truly looks like.